I remember the moment clearly, not because it was dramatic or overwhelming, but because it was quietly unsettling, the kind of subtle shift you only notice once you stop to pay attention. I was sitting alone in my living room after a long day, scrolling through something idle on my phone, when a tiny realization crept into the edges of my awareness. My energy felt off, not drained by exhaustion or hard work, but dull, like a low hum just beneath the surface, something I couldn't shake no matter what I tried. It wasn't that I was tired in the usual sense. It was more like my body and mind had slipped into this slow, almost imperceptible state of ease that felt comfortable but not alive. I paused, setting the phone down, as if my body was trying to tell me something. What used to burn hot inside, the drive to push, to test my limits, to meet challenge head-on, had cooled into a kind of quiet surrender. I wasn't lazy, not really. I had no grand excuses or hidden distractions. I simply found myself avoiding any task that demanded lasting effort. It was strange because on the surface, everything seemed stable. Work was steady, routines predictable, comforts abundant. I even told myself this was a good thing. I'm stable, I'm secure. But beneath that calm exterior was this creeping numbness. A part of me wondered, was my body forgetting how to fight, how to rise when the stakes were high? It struck me then, something I hadn't consciously acknowledged before. Comfort can be misleading. We often think of comfort as a sign of success or well-being, but what happens when comfort becomes the only experience? When every day feels designed to avoid friction, to shield us from resistance rather than prepare us for it. Over time, this ease carries a cost we rarely speak about openly. It doesn't announce itself with alarms or pain. Instead, it tiptoes in and settles quietly, eroding the core of who we are as men, designed not just to survive but to thrive through challenge. There was a line I remember overhearing somewhere, something about how the male body wasn't architected for constant ease. I never fully grasped the weight of that until now. It's almost paradoxical. When everything's smooth, our system enters a mode of conservation, pulling back strength, lowering alertness, dialing down vital hormones. We end up confusing the absence of stress with a healthy balance, when in reality our very nature is calling for calibrated pressure, something hard enough to ignite a spark but not so much it breaks us. Without this, strength quietly slips away. Motivation fades. We lose touch with that primal energy that used to feel like fire under our skin. The strange thing is, no one hands us a manual about this slowing down, this decrease that happens inside us while the world keeps spinning. It's almost invisible, until one day you wake up and realize you don't have the same stamina, focus, or hunger. It's not a sudden collapse but a gentle decline, like a well that's not quite dry but no longer flows with the force it once did. And because the world around us often rewards convenience, we don't miss it right away or even recognize it's missing at all. Stability masquerades as safety. Ease feels like peace, but peace without vitality is hollow. I found myself looking inward, wondering when I traded that natural resistance for this predictable comfort. What areas of my life had become too soft, too undemanding? Was it my work, where challenges no longer push me to grow but drift toward routine? Was it my body, no longer put to the test in any meaningful way? Was it my mind, numbed by distraction rather than sharpened by purpose? The quiet avoidance of difficulty wasn't born from a lack of will. It was born from a body and spirit that had forgotten how to respond to true demand. I knew this wouldn't be an easy truth to face. None of the steps I might take to get back on track would be about escaping comfort entirely. That was never the point. It was about awakening something deeper inside, about responding to the call that often goes unheard beneath the soft hum of modern life. There's a silent charge that comes when challenge meets readiness, and when that charge returns, it can light up a man's vitality in ways that nothing else can. I want to share this journey with you because I suspect you know this feeling all too well. Maybe you haven't put it into words yet, but that slow drain of energy, even amid a life that looks comfortable from the outside, runs in many of us. This isn't about shame or failure. It's about understanding the subtle ways comfort might be dimming the strength inside you. It's about recognizing that the calm you trust might be quietly holding you back. And more than anything, it's about opening the door to something more alive, more potent, waiting patiently beneath the surface. As we move forward together, I'll be honest with you, we're going to face some tough questions. We'll explore why a man's body needs more than rest and ease to thrive. We'll talk about the invisible weight of comfort that can dull your vitality and how to find a path that respects the need for challenge without pushing into burnout. This is not a lecture or a quick fix. It's a conversation about reclaiming what's always been yours. A strength that lies in tension, a power that wakes when pressed, and a life fully charged, ready to meet the world again. So before we dive deeper, I want to ask, where do you feel that comfort might be quietly weakening you right now? What part of your life feels easy to the point of dullness, and what might that be costing you? Take a moment, write it down if you like, because this is where the energy started to fade, and acknowledging that is the first step to turning the tide. There was one afternoon when I decided to push myself beyond my usual limits, sensing that something intangible had been slipping away unnoticed. I laced up my shoes and went for a run. Not the easy stroll I usually took, but a route filled with hills, uneven paths, and unpredictable terrain. The first few minutes felt brutal. My lungs burning, muscles aching, mind flooded with excuses. Yet, as I persisted, a strange sense of aliveness began to take hold. It was like waking from a long hibernation, each stride reconnecting me with parts of myself that had lain dormant. This experience brought into focus how the absence of challenge doesn't just dull our bodies. It silences the conversations between our mind and muscles where growth happens. I realized that when my days rolled by without interruption, without those moments that forced me to summon effort, my physical capacity shrank. More surprising was how that shrinking spilled over into my mental stamina, clouding my ability to concentrate, dampening creativity, and draining my willpower. That run wasn't merely a physical test. It rekindled a dialogue within me, reminding me what it feels like to be fully engaged, to awaken potential lying in wait. I recall one particular evening when a friend invited me to join a rock climbing session. Climbing was never my forte, so I hesitated, but there was an undeniable pull, a whisper that this might be the kind of resistance my body and psyche craved. On the wall, every movement required precision and strength. Every hold presented a problem to solve. I faced moments where my grip faltered, breath shortened, and fear flickered. But through each near fall and stubborn ascent, I caught glimpses of my own resilience regenerating. The physical tension became a language of empowerment, teaching me that embracing friction can forge strength and clarity. Returning home that night, my muscles and thoughts alike hummed with renewed vigor. At the same time, I began observing how constant convenience subtly influences our decisions, carrying us toward choices that demand the least energy, that avoid strain, that satisfy immediate ease. The routine comfort zone disguises itself as a safe harbor, but in truth, it's a kind of harbor where the tides no longer surge, and the currents lose their force. Without those waves pressing against us, the muscles grow lax, the systems atrophy, and the spirit quiets its pulse. Our bodies, which once rose to meet daily trials like warriors preparing for battle, fall into a kind of quiet resignation, unaccustomed to exertion. I recall talking with an older mentor who framed this differently but profoundly. He said, "Men are like steel that needs to be forged by fire. Too much shelter from the heat leaves you brittle, fragile to unforeseen shocks." His metaphor rang true. Protection and insulation on their own do not guarantee strength. Instead, it is the intentional exposure to strain, calibrated, respectful of one's limits, that tempers endurance. I realized how often I had sought shelter in predictable patterns, never deliberately arranging challenges that would sharpen me for unpredictable demands ahead. Without renewal through contest, strength becomes a memory rather than a reality. Another key insight came as I examined rest and recovery, often misunderstood in the quest for vitality. Rest is essential, yes, but rest devoid of tension, devoid of balanced stimulus, can become stagnation. It's like soil left untouched for too long. It loses nutrients and fails to support growth. Our physiology thrives on cycles that alternate between strain and release, between pushing boundaries and allowing repair. Overindulgence in rest or ease starves the system of the impulses that signal it to remain robust. The body needs to experience calculated resistance not just to survive but to orchestrate hormonal rhythms that fuel drive, focus, and physical capacity. I began incorporating deliberate yet manageable challenges. Brief bursts of intense exercise, cold showers that jolt the nervous system awake, daily stretches that inquire into tight spots, and mental puzzles that demanded focus. Each acted like a spark to reawaken my inner engine. These small interventions created ripple effects. Sleep improved, moods lifted, and an undercurrent of vitality ebbed back into my days. However, this process wasn't about extremes or punishment. It was about honoring the body's design to respond to varied stimuli, dialing the difficulty just high enough to invite adaptation. Now, consider how this applies when you face obstacles that require extended effort, like tackling a tough project, navigating conflict, or maintaining discipline with your health. If your system has grown accustomed to avoiding discomfort, the first sign of resistance can trigger a retreat, not out of weakness but due to a kind of biological forgetting. I saw this in my hesitation before attempting any sustained challenge. I was no longer primed to endure incremental strain. It became clear that regaining this readiness would not come from a single leap but through gradual, precise steps that rekindle responsiveness at every level. One evening, during a sleepless night spent reflecting, I acknowledged a truth often left unspoken. Resilience is not innate, nor is it guaranteed by good intentions alone. It must be cultivated through persistent engagement with difficulty, tempered by rest and reflection. Like a craftsman shaping wood, the contours of strength reveal themselves slowly, through patient work on rough edges, through resistance encountered and overcome. This slow craftsmanship is what restores the capacity to confront hardship without folding. Through this unfolding process, I committed to seeking opportunities that challenge me, not as burdens but as invitations to awaken latent vigor. I stopped expecting energy to be a constant flow sustained by ease, and instead welcomed fluctuations as signs of a system alive, adapting, and growing. This recalibration transformed how I approached daily tasks, relationships, and even moments of solitude. Each became a chance to invoke intentional tension and release, a dance that reconnects the mind and body in a rhythm of authentic power. In this journey, I invite you to notice what kind of friction your life currently lacks. Where does predictable ease dull your alertness? What areas slow your pulse when they should quicken it? Ask yourself not how to escape discomfort, but how to reimagine it as a doorway to strength. The road back to vitality demands no reckless leaps but intentional encounters with resistance that awaken resilience, fostering a deeper connection with the primal engines of energy inside you. One evening, as dusk settled and shadows stretched across my apartment, I found myself pacing aimlessly, restless in a way that felt more than just physical. The usual distractions, screens, idle chatter, background noise, failed to soothe the unease pressing down on my chest. Instead, it was as if an invisible weight was holding me back, a paradoxical sensation of being heavy but hollow. I sat down and tried to trace this discomfort. It wasn't pain or anxiety typical of crisis, but a persistent numbness masking something vital slipping away. That night, I realized that constant convenience had numbed the most elemental dialogue I needed to have with my own challenge threshold. In those quiet hours, I recalled a time from my childhood when life demanded raw interaction with struggle. I remembered climbing a massive oak tree in the backyard, every branch a test of grip and balance. The thrill wasn't simply about reaching the top. It was discovering the boundary between fear and confidence, exertion and triumph. Each inch upward forged a connection between my will and physical capability. Unlike the static ease that surrounds me now, that moment was alive with unpredictability, a dynamic interplay that sharpened my awareness and sparked growth. It dawned on me how those early encounters with real physical risk were like tuning forks, vibrating energy through my veins that today's cushioned habits no longer provoke. I decided then to seek environments that pushed me out of robotic comfort. One Saturday, I signed up for an obstacle race, a jumble of mud, ropes, and uphill sprints designed to force every muscle and nerve into alertness. Preparing for it wasn't glamorous. I faced soreness, doubts, and moments of self-sabotage prompting me to quit. Yet, on the day itself, struggling through the muck and grip of tangled ropes. The adrenaline surge was intoxicating. It reinvigorated parts of myself I'd forgotten, raw resilience, gritty willpower, and a fierce sense of presence. This wasn't about winning. It was reclaiming a neglected belonging to my own strength. As I reflect on this, it's clear that regular exposure to calculated hardship rewires neurological pathways that influence our mood and mental acuity. It's akin to fertilizing a garden. Without the right disturbance, growth stagnates. Our hormones depend on this rhythm of strain, not in reckless excess but in measured doses that send signals of demand and readiness. I observed how the absence of these signals dulled my focus, shortened patience, and deepened procrastination, forming a vicious cycle where inactivity birthed inertia. Restoring that cycle through intentional effort helped reset a vital mechanism that thrives on challenge as its nutrient. In this process, I also confronted unexpected emotional layers. Pushing myself outside familiar boundaries unearthed buried insecurities, fears of inadequacy, judgment, and failure. Each difficult moment brought me face to face with vulnerability, forcing me to grapple honestly with what it means to be accountable to my growth. I began journaling these feelings, narrating my struggles and triumphs not as isolated episodes, but as chapters in an unfolding story of self-mastery. This act humanized my journey, transforming challenge from a source of dread into an invitation for deeper engagement. Another pivotal insight came when I noticed the transformative power of rhythm in challenge. It wasn't simply about exerting force, but about orchestrating intervals of intensity and calm that mirrored life's natural cadences. For example, during high-intensity cycling sessions, alternating bursts of effort with moments of recovery taught me patience and attunement to my limits. This not only enhanced endurance but also cultivated self-trust, the sense that I could navigate difficulty without breaking or surrendering entirely. The metaphor of waves breaking and retreating resonates. It's the tension and relaxation together that build resilience rather than constant pushing. Conversation with a longtime friend illuminated another angle. He described how his father's rugged lifestyle required him to work with hands, soil, and sweat every day, embodying a continuous dialogue between man and challenge. Hearing this, I understood how distancing ourselves from tangible, exertive tasks can erode identity and invite a disconnection from innate power. His story urged me to reintegrate manual labor into my routine, not as punishment, but as a meaningful bridge between intention and embodiment. Carrying heavy bags, chopping wood, or gardening became rituals reconnecting me with physical realness often missing in modern life. Each act was a small rebellion against the anesthesia of comfort. While the temptation to cling to ease remains persistent, this journey reveals the profound paradox. True stability arises from dynamic engagement, not from clinging to predictability. When energy wanes and motivation sputters, it often signals that the inner equilibrium has shifted toward stasis, away from the vibrant exchange that challenge provides. Recognizing this allowed me to welcome friction as a familiar companion rather than an adversary. This reframing transforms effort into a language, a way of conversing with ourselves that reawakens potency and reveals untapped potential. In practice, I began structuring my days around deliberate challenges, learning new skills that resist quick mastery, setting physical goals that require persistence, and embracing discomfort in social or creative contexts. These initiatives helped me transcend the inertia bred by overcomfort, replacing it with a growth impetus uniquely my own. By introducing diversity and unpredictability, I gradually rebuilt the framework allowing energy to circulate freely, culminating in renewed enthusiasm for action. I invite you now to reflect on your routines and environment. Where might you consciously insert moments that compel you to engage fully, to adapt, to push your limits thoughtfully? Identifying those spaces could be the key to breaking out of low-energy loops, reigniting the spark that fuels your masculine force. Remember, the path forward thrives not on escaping comfort, but on embracing challenge as a catalyst for transformation. I remember a moment when I stood at the edge of a frozen lake one chilly morning, the brittle air sharp against my skin. The ice stretched out like a polished mirror, tempting yet daunting. A group of friends had already taken the plunge, literally. diving into the frigid water to awaken their senses and test their limits. Watching them, I felt an urge stir inside, something primal and restless, but also an invisible tether pulling me back toward comfort. The cold was unforgiving, ruthless even. Still, I knew succumbing to hesitation would only deepen that dullness creeping into my bones. Taking a deep breath that seemed to draw in every trembling molecule around me, I stepped forward. The shock was immediate, my body convulsing as icy water wrapped around me like a vice. My mind raced to reconcile pain with purpose, and in that harsh confrontation, I experienced a part of myself resurface, raw, essential, alive. It wasn't just about enduring the cold. It was about reigniting a signal deep within me that said, "You're here. You still have fire." As I clambered out, numb but invigorated, I realized discomfort could be a kind of truth serum, stripping away complacency and demanding full presence. From that day on, I became fascinated by the subtle ways we anesthetize our systems without realizing it. Comfort creeps in like fog, blurring the edges of urgency and dulling the sharpness we need to thrive. I started experimenting with deliberate disruptions, new routines that challenged my mind and body in fresh ways. One such experiment was learning to handle primal movement, activities that mimic the raw motions our ancestors relied on: crawling, jumping, climbing. These felt unnatural at first, as if my frame had stiffened with neglect. Yet gradually, as muscles reawakened, I sensed a re-education taking place, a recalibration that demanded coordination, attention, and a willingness to be awkward before becoming proficient. One afternoon, after a day spent crawling across uneven floors and balancing on beams, I sat overwhelmed but quietly triumphant. The fatigue was unlike any sleepiness brought on by passive rest. It felt like a signal of adaptation, a badge earned through intentional strain. These sessions weren't about performance. They were negotiations with my own limits, invitations to restore the dialogue between effort and relief. Instead of seeking shortcuts or sedentary ease, I began to appreciate the gritty process of slowly edging toward more complex challenges, valuing progress over perfection. Alongside physical experiments, I also began exploring mental adversity, intentionally exposing myself to tasks that resisted immediate mastery. I tackled complex puzzles and tried public speaking, arenas where discomfort felt less tangible but no less real. During a nerve-wracking community event, standing before unfamiliar faces with my heart pounding, I witnessed how confronting anxiety head-on weakened its grip. Each shaky word spoken was a small victory, a reclamation of agency over inner turmoil. These moments fed a reservoir of confidence, teaching me that growth often lurks just beyond uneasy zones, and that absence of mental friction may slowly erode resilience just as surely as physical stagnation saps strength. Reflecting on these efforts, I recall a weekend retreat where silence was enforced, along with moments of mindfulness and breathwork. Stripped of distractions, I confronted a restlessness that throbbed in quiet intervals. The stillness revealed how frequently I had used distraction as an armor against all urges that provoked discomfort. Without the usual noise, sensations collided: cravings, doubts, memories, each demanding acknowledgement. Instead of fleeing, I learned to observe this internal stirring, sitting in a state of attentive acceptance. It was a confrontation with vulnerability that deepened self-awareness, teaching me that our aversion to challenge often masks a fear of meeting unresolved parts within ourselves. What fascinated me most was how these diverse challenges, physical, mental, emotional, intertwined to ripple across daily life. After weeks of practicing exposure to controlled discomforts, a new pattern emerged. I woke with sharper clarity, more decisive resolve, and an invigorated sense of purpose. Simple routines that once felt like tedious chores now summoned a curiosity to exceed minimal effort. Conversations became richer, not because I forced them, but because I had cultivated attentiveness through embracing internal and external resistance. It dawned on me that vitality isn't compartmentalized. It flows across dimensions, each supporting and amplifying the other when nurtured carefully. During a particularly grueling hike through dense woods, navigating slippery slopes and dense thickets, I felt a tangible link between challenge and identity. The path forced me to stay alert, weaving a web of sensory input and physical response. When a misstep sent gravel skittering beneath my boots, heart jolting, I instinctively refocused, grounding myself in the moment. The hike was more than exercise. It was a metaphor incarnate. Life asks us to move through unpredictability, demanding balance and the courage to recover after falters. Facing it directly reaffirmed an internal narrative. Strength is less about invulnerability and more about fluid adaptation. Now, consider how this philosophy translates into turning points when career or relationships demand sustained engagement with uncertainty. Rather than recoiling from tension, intentionally inviting nuanced challenge can cultivate deeper communication and creative problem-solving. I learned that growth often takes shape not through grand upheavals but through steady exposure to manageable discomforts that shift perspective incrementally. This gradual evolution nurtures an inner tenacity that steepens confidence, equipping me to face larger obstacles with composure and energy. An unexpected benefit emerged as well, a heightened sense of gratitude for moments of ease when they appeared. By recognizing that comfort is restorative only in cycles punctuated by challenge, I allowed myself to savor rest without guilt or restlessness. Comfort reclaimed its role as a conscious replenishment rather than a dulling constant. The contrast between these states fostered a richer appreciation of balance, turning daily life into a more textured experience, an ongoing composition of tension and release rather than flat monotony. Seeing all this unfold, I realized that energy is not a finite resource to hoard, but a dynamic current requiring movement, interruption, and renewal. When I consciously weave in variety, embracing moments that unsettle equilibrium, I multiply vitality exponentially. For any man feeling the drag of monotonous ease, the invitation shines clear. Lean into carefully chosen discomforts that awaken the spirit's edge and catalyze transformation. The spark you thought had flickered out may only be waiting for a gust of fresh challenge to roar back into flame. Reflecting on what has unfolded within me, I feel as though I stand at the edge of a vast landscape, one textured not by smooth plains, but by ridges and valleys carved from enduring forces. It's as if the essence of my being has undergone a subtle distillation, where the quiet weight of ease gradually unveiled hidden fissures beneath what once seemed solid ground. There is a particular stillness now, but it hums with an expectant tension, like the charged silence before a storm reshapes the sky. In carrying the layers of insight forward, I sense that everything quietly aligns toward a convergence, a critical moment that isn't distant but breathing beside me. I recall a late evening when a friend and I spoke without distractions, seated by the flicker of a dwindling fire. Our conversation meandered through the spaces where comfort often masquerades as sanctuary, and I observed how our words knotted tightly around the notion of surrender. Not surrender as defeat, but surrender as the subtle relinquishing of the very currents that once animated us at our core. The fire itself, alive in its crackling, unpredictable dance, contrasted sharply with the stillness settling within both of us, echoing the tension between vitality and the inertia comfort can breed. In that flicker, I felt the pulse of a hidden paradox. Vitality's source calls for friction as much as it craves stillness. The evening's silence didn't resolve questions. It magnified them, inviting reflection without refuge. Walking alone that night beneath the canopy of stars, the cool air seemed to weave through my thoughts, tightening the threads that had embroidered over months of gradual noticing. These threads tangled together, weaving a fabric not easily unraveled, each fiber representing the subtle energies swirling beneath my skin, shaped by forces both waiting and resisting. The night seemed alive with whispers, hints of an inner conversation long ignored or muffled under layers of complacency. It was as if a deep part of me was awakening to a call that had spoken softly all along, its volume masked by habitual quietude. Something akin to a current had been stirred, an unseen tide drawing me toward recognition. A recognition that vitality does not succumb to passivity, but depends on a dynamic interplay, like the ceaseless exchange between wind and flame. One cannot exist sustainably without courting the other. Stillness can nurture, but only when balanced by the breath of purposeful motion. Through this lens, my own experience transformed from isolated episodes to manifestations of a deeper truth. that existence itself resists stagnation and thrives when met with the intentional art of renewal. There is, I suspect, an invitation embedded within these converging ideas. It hypothesizes that our complexity demands we rethink what we accept from our surroundings, our habits, and ourselves. I imagine us standing, collectively yet distinctly, before a metaphorical crucible, a place where what has solidified over time may be softened, reformed, and given new shape. This space is neither comfortable nor clear-cut, filled instead with challenge and uncertainty that calls forth strength not through coercion, but through a quiet, unyielding insistence. I've noticed, too, how the narrative we tell ourselves about endurance and ease colors our actions far more than we realize. The stories, sometimes silent or barely audible, cast long shadows over the paths we choose, shaping the contours of our resolve or its absence. To move forward, therefore, seems to hinge on an unspoken pact. To engage honestly with interruptions in our settled rhythm, to invite disruptions that refine rather than fracture, and to see courage in the conscious embrace of what unsettles us. Along this unknown yet beckoning road, tension becomes less an enemy and more a guide, a way to reconnect with a source of energy both ancient and deeply personal. As I stand on this threshold, the weight of accumulated understanding feels neither burdensome nor light. It presses with the gravity of inevitability while offering an undercurrent of promise. It is as if the air around me shifts, charged with possibility drawn from the space between resistance and release. I hear the quiet heartbeat of what lies ahead, tempered by every step taken and every hesitation overcome, ready to infuse the next phase with a fuel kindled by all that has preceded. The horizon stretches wide, its edges soft with dawn, and there is a sense, in me and in us, of a beginning poised imminently to unfold. Sometimes, I find myself sitting in the quiet moments of dusk, feeling an unexpected surge of clarity ripple through me. It's in this gentle hush that I grasp how deeply intertwined struggle and vitality truly are, how they exist not in opposition, but as two halves of a whole that pulse together in the rhythm of human life. I think about the quiet desperation so many of us carry, veiled by the gloss of ease and unbroken routine, and how that veneer can slowly obscure the fierce spark meant to burn steady within us. What strikes me most is how easily comfort can masquerade as strength, how the absence of friction tempts us into a lull that dims our internal fire. Yet there's a profound truth quietly whispering from an ancient place inside, the truth that our power awakens only when we are summoned to resist, to exert, to confront challenge head-on. It is as if our bodies and minds are composed not to endure endless calm, but to dance with difficulty in measured, purposeful steps that stoke energy, sharpen focus, and deepen resolve. I remember a particular afternoon when everything in me recoiled from a daunting task ahead. I was tempted to retreat into ease, to settle back into habits that required no exertion. Instead, I chose otherwise. Each hesitant step into that challenge felt like a reclaiming, not just of physical strength but of identity. The fatigue I felt wasn't defeat. It was proof my system was realigning, reminding me how far I had drifted from the pulse of vigorous engagement. Those moments became milestones, simple yet profound, marking a turning point where I stopped confusing inactivity for safety and recognized it as a slow departure from fullness. In the quiet aftermath of such decisions, I come to appreciate that embracing discomfort isn't about reckless hardship or self-imposed punishment. It's a sacred invitation to reconnect to our intrinsic design, an honoring of the cycles where tension leads to breakthrough, effort kindles growth, and challenges become teachers. Life unfolds in these spaces where strength is forged, not by avoidance, but by conscious encounters with what stretches us just enough to evolve. This journey carries deeper implications for how we live, choose, and define success. It invites us to invite disruptions that cut through stagnation, to seek moments that test patience, attention, and grit in ways that refresh and renew. In doing so, I find the boundaries between body and mind dissolve. They feed into one another, each fueling the other's capacity to rise. The notion of masculine energy reveals itself here as dynamic, resilient, and ever-responsive, sustained by the embrace of purposeful strain rather than shielded from it. I often think about how easy it is to mistake constant ease for genuine well-being, and how this misjudgment quietly erodes our essential vitality. What I've learned is that energy is not a fixed reservoir to be preserved through avoidance, but a living current that awakens fully only when challenged. This current requires us to listen deeply to our own rhythms, to discern when our lives have tilted too far toward comfort's soft edges and lost sight of the invigorating pulse found in meaningful resistance. There is dignity in choosing to move toward discomfort, in honoring the unspoken contract with ourselves to stay active participants in our growth. Each deliberate step forward, no matter how small or tentative, becomes a profound act of courage. Layers of old lethargy peel back, revealing strength that had quietly waited for a chance to reclaim its place. The path back to this vitality is not one of perfection, nor instantaneous transformation, but of steady, conscious effort grounded in compassion for where we are now and faith in where we can arrive. I invite anyone reading this to consider where their own softness may be quietly dulling their spirit, which corners of their daily existence ask for more engagement, risk, or resolve. This is not a call to reckless abandon but to mindful reawakening, to finding those moments that beckon a fuller presence, greater intensity, and renewed passion. Somewhere in that interplay between ease and challenge lies a living spark that can revitalize not only the body and mind but our very experience of being alive. In the end, the story I live now is one of becoming ever more attentive to this balance, welcoming discomfort not as an enemy but as a vital partner in shaping who I am meant to be. It is a narrative woven from the fabric of falling into ease and rising again into effort, a dance as old as time that transforms stagnation into dynamic flow. And in this dance, I find a profound truth. Strength is never lost, for it waits patiently, ready to surge anew whenever we choose to answer the call.